surmise been laid before Darcy, it might have brought sorely needed encouragement to her soul as the regenerative process went on. True, she had presently passed the first crisis which athletic regimen develops for the untrained, and which is purely muscular. She no longer swung to and fro, a helpless pendulum, between the agonies of apprehension and the anguish of action. The steady exercise was telling insofar as her muscles were concerned. She had still to face the test of discipline. In this second and sterner crisis, Auntie Dunn could help her but little. It was a question of her own power of will, a will grown slack and flabby from lack of exercise. Ahead of her loomed, only dimly discerned as yet, the ordeal of strenuous monotony, the deadly, dull, prolonged grind wherein endurance, as it hardens, is subjected to a constantly harsher strain until the soul revolts as, in the earlier stage, the body had rebelled. A subject like Gloria Greene, high and fine of spirit, the sage Mr. Dunn could have eased through the difficult phase by appeals to her pride and to the sense of partnership which the successful trainer must establish between himself and his pupil. With Darcy, this was impracticable, because Auntie Dunn, as he would have admitted with a regretful grin, was in wrong. Darcy enthusiastically hated him. At first sight, she had estimated him as a STEM spirit. Through successive changes, that reckoning had been altered to harsh, then brutal, and now satanic. Gloria's judgment of her note of introduction as a commutation ticket to Hades first class was amply borne out. Professionally, Mr. Dunn's discourse tended ever to the hortatory and corrective. He was a master of the verbal route. Keep it up. Again. Put some punch in it. Y'all ain't half trying. Go on. You gotta do better than that. And occasionally, rock. Worse still was a manner he had of regarding her with an expression of mild and regretful wonder, whilst giving voice to his bulldoggish "rumph," in a tone indicating only too plainly that never before was a conscientious trainer so bored and afflicted with such an utterly incompetent, inefficient, and generally hopeless subject as the daily withering Darcy. In lighter moments, he would regale her with reminiscences of the big feller and his eccentricities in and insubordinations under training, while Darcy would lie, panting and spent, on the hard floor, wondering regretfully why the big feller hadn't killed Mr. Dunn when opportunities must have been so plentiful. Then, just as her labored breathing would begin to ease, the taskmaster in Mr. Dunn would awaken. The call, "Time," would sound like doom to her ears, and she would set to it again, arching on her back, rolling on her stomach, where the 3 creases were beginning to flatten, yanking at overweighted pulleys, interminably skipping a loathly rope, standing up like a dumb tin pan before the ponderous medicine ball which Mr. Dunn hurled at her, punching at an elusive and too often vengeful bag, rowing an imaginary boat against wind, wave, and every dictate of her weary body, and finally running silly circles around the room like a demented cat, until the monitor uttered the one lone word of pity in his inquisitorial vocabulary: "Nuff." Had all this deep-wrung sweat of brow and soul produced any definable effect, Darcy could have borne it with a resigned spirit. It didn't. 4 times a week she went through the hideous grind, and nothing happened. Each night she went to bed early, and after profound sleep had to get up out of the cuddly warmth into a shudderingly cold bath, and nothing happened. She gave up the before-dinner cocktail, and with it what little zest she had for her deadly plain diet, and nothing happened. She denied her sweet tea, so much as one little bite of candy. Oh, but that was a bitter deprivation. And nothing happened. To her regimen at the gymnasium, she added a stint of simple but violent house exercises on off days. And nothing happened. Life, which she had supposed, in her first flush of hopeful enthusiasm for the new regime, would be one grand sweet song, was, in fact, one petty, sour discord, wherein nothing happened. This was quite right and logical, had Darcy but known it. Layers of fat, physical and moral, accumulated through years of self-coddling, are not worked off in a week or a month. There came a day when something did happen. There always does. It was not of that order of occurrences which can be foreseen by the expert eye. It seldom is. Andy Dunn, honestly and simply intent on earning his money, had been unusually exigent. Besides, Darcy had a nail in her shoe. Besides, Mr. Regal had been curtly critical of her latest and most original design as newfangled. Besides, Maud was becoming satirically curious as to where she was spending so many afternoons. Besides, it was a rotten day. There was no light on earth or in heaven. What's the use of it all anyway? Thought Darcy to herself, for perhaps the 50th time, but rather more fervently than before. As if in exasperation of her agnostic mood, the preceptor, in the half-time intermission, has suggested not less, but more work. "You're getting stale," observed Mr. Dunn, which Darcy thought a hopeful beginning. "I feel so," she said. "There's a clock," Mr. Dunn informed her, "at 59th and 8th. Darcy waited. "There's another at 110th and 7th. Pursued the chronometrical Mr. Dunn, and fell into calculating thought. Darcy waited again. "You leave 59th at 4:20 p.m. "When?" "Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays." "Oh," said Darcy blankly. "And you get to 110th in time to hear that clock strike 5. "What? Walk? Nearly 3 miles in 40 minutes?" "No," said Mr. Dunn thoughtfully. "Then how? You'd better run part way or you won't make it on time." "You want to kill me," declared the petulant and self-pitying Darcy. "Rumph," said Mr. Dunn. "Suppose it rains," put forth Darcy desperately. "Then y'all get wet," was Mr. Dunn's reason. "And catch my death riding back in the bus." "Don't ride. Walk. I'm giving this to you for fresh air." "But, Mr. Dunn, time!" It may have been this fresh grievance which lay heavy upon Darcy's chest, clogging her breathing and slowing her suppled muscles. She was conscious of doing less well than usual, and of not caring either. The medicine ball was heavier and more unwieldy than ever. The punching bag, instinct with demoniac vitality, came back at her on a new schedule and bumped her nose violently. A mortifying incident which had not occurred since the first week. The despicable little handball, propelled by her trainer, bounded just a fraction of an inch out of her straining reach, and when she did hit it, felt as soggy as sand and as hard as rock, and raised stone bruises on her hands. She even pinched her thumb in the rowing machine, which is the zenith of inexpertness. With every fresh mishap, she became more self-piteous and resentful and reckless. Andy, the experienced, would have ascribed all this to that common, if obscure phenomenon, an off day, familiar to every professor, whether of integral calculus or the high trapeze. Then the dreadful thing happened, and he revised his opinion. The last, and therefore worst, 5 minutes of the grind had come. Darcy lay on the mat, going through the loathed body and limb lifting, while Andy Dunn exhorted her to speed up. "Now the legs, come on, hup!" Something in Darcy went on strike. "Can't," she said. "Grumph, what's the matter?" "Won't," said Darcy. From the corner of a hot and rebellious eye, she could see overspreading her trainer's face that familiar expression of contemptuous and weary patience. Anything else she could have stood, but that was the spark that fired the powder. Stooping over, the trainer laid hold, none too gently, on one inert heel. Heaven and earth reserved themselves for Mr. Andy Dunn. Also, day and night, for a galaxy of stars appeared and circulated before his mazed eyes. the walls and the ceiling joined in the whirl, to which an end was set by the impact of the floor against the back of his head. For one brief, sweet, romantic moment, Andy Dunn was back in the training ring with the big feller.